Steve, let us be honest here. We've been going a couple of years now. We've got good traction with those who are loyal to the channel, and we're ticking up on subscribers, and we really enjoy what we do. What's interesting is if you to look at the history of the channel, when we stopped doing Genesis and focused on Mark's Gospel, comments generally dried up. And there was this one quote from about a month ago. I'll read it out in its entirety. What I find absolutely amazing about your reel, and that was a long short, and I guess a reflection of our society, is you only have 3 likes, and I'm the only comment. I have no idea how this has been up, but today is January the 16th. I think it means how long? 2025. And I think this reflects clearly on where the society is pretty scary. Glory and praise to Jesus Christ. I get the feeling that what he's trying to say is that, unlike a lot of channels, and good luck to them, who cover subjects to a certain depth, it could be argued we go deep. We're touching the Earth's core here with the depth that we go to. And I know for a fact that you have done Revelation on your own channel. And how long did it take you to get to where you are now?
It's taken 19 months to do 3 chapters.
And that's one long episode almost every week. You'd assume Christians would love that, would want to come across that and to digest it. But I'm thinking, do they? Where are we at the moment with Christianity, which, let us be honest, it's in the news quite a lot, so specifically the Western Christianity and America and the new Reformation movement and Pentecostal and how that's affecting politics. Where are we with Christianity?
And I think that the question that we really need to answer here is, what do we mean by Christianity to start with? Because where we are with
Good point.
The institution of Christianity in terms of a sort of geopolitical movement, i.e. a Western-based movement that underpins political parties and political worldviews and points of view, I think is very different from what Christianity is. So in terms of Christianity, we are looking at people who believe that 2,000 years ago, a Jewish rabbi who put his toes in the sand was the human manifestation of God on earth. However weird that may sound, however funky it sounds, and however much we can't understand how God could do that, or indeed why God would do that. That's what Christianity is. It's about believing that Jesus is God in human form. And then to live a life that seeks to honour him and to promote his way and his teaching. Christianity was called the Way, because he is, according to Christian teaching, he is the only way to reconciliation with this great spirit that in Christianese we call God the Father. So there is a distinct difference, I think, from what we see as Christian in reality and Christian on the world stage. So on the world stage, we will have certain politicians having huge support from Christian churches, from evangelical preachers and teachers, because it aligns with their political views, or it aligns with what they think they ought to be doing. And I think that Christianity is different to that. I think Christianity transcends politics, it transcends nations, it transcends cultures, society, and indeed political whims. And I think that we need to be very clear and we need to understand what Christianity is. But the Christianity that we see played out in the news isn't Christianity. At least I don't think it is.
No, and it's unfortunate. What's interesting, I forget his name. I sent you the link yesterday. It was the Bald Walk podcast. And it was a recent discussion with a New York Times columnist who's obviously very evangelical. And there was a gentleman, we talked about him before, who was evangelical, I think Southern Baptist or Pentecostal, who's now really advocating to be Christ-like, but not necessarily churchian. And he said he remembers when he was talking to his congregation some years back about the Sermon on the Mount. And someone came up to him afterwards and said, "Where are you getting these liberal talking points from?" And he said, "What do you mean? This is what Christ said." There's definitely this shift, and it's not just in the States, and you'll know about this more than I will. There's been this shift in, well, I don't know how long, last 10, 15 years, to the point that now, if you looked at people who call themselves Christian, if they're Christian nationalist, They're unrecognizable, but they still call themselves Christian. They still go to a church. There seems to be this mixture, this mixing, this blending to the point you can't recognize almost now true Christianity and Churchianity. And we have done an episode on there's a real distinction. And should there in fact be a renaming? I don't know. I mean, you say what you think Christianity is, but perhaps we should probably start by saying what it isn't.
Yeah, and I think what it isn't is it's not a political movement. That's what it isn't. It is not left nor right. It transcends all of that. And I think if you try and make it a political thing, you lose the essence of what it's all about. You see, Christianity gets hijacked. Christianity as a term has been hijacked through human beings who have wanted to conquer the world in the name of Christ. Well, if you want to conquer the world in the name of Christ, here's the way you do it. You present the kingdom of God on earth as an alternative social reality to what's going on about you, which means that when you see hatred, you bring peace and love. When you see people on the bones of their backside, you give of your blessings out to them. Where you see people that are sick and unwell, you get alongside them to lift them up and to try and bring compassion and healing into their life. What you don't do is march into their land, conquer their land, steal all of their precious products of their land, and then march out again, having planted a cross or indeed a flag saying "No flag, no country." Yeah.
Do you have a flag?
And that's what Christianity is. You don't conquer in the name of the cross. You don't ride into battle like the Crusaders did in days of old, under the banner of the cross to conquer and see how many flipping babies' heads you can put on spikes and that sort of thing. That's not Christianity. That is worldly power, which is being manifest and giving itself a modicum of respectability by dousing it in a religious flavour. Well, that's nonsense. And so as soon as you start to see that sort of thing happening, you know that you're not looking at what is the teaching of Christ. And a Christian should be following the teachings of Christ. So there's so much to it, and it's not about being liberal either. It's liberal in the terms of we'd understand liberality. There's a really good sort of satirical writing by a chap called Adrian Plass, who's a Church of England fella probably back in the 80s. I remember him many years ago, and he hits the nail on the head with some of his observations of. So he writes about the Christian world and what he sees in Christian circles, and then he builds characters around his stories who are very Christian, and anybody who attended a church or a Bible study would go, aha, I recognise that type of caricature. And in one of his writings, which is The Sacred Diary of Adrian Plass, Christian speaker aged 45 3/4, he has this piece that he writes, which is being spoken by his wife to somebody who is incredibly religious. This lady in the book, a fictional character in the book, is a lady called Doreen Cook, and she is what you'd call a religious zealot. So she would be your typical right-wing fundamentalist evangelical. The Bible says it, you must believe it in exactly, and everything is literal, but would have no time for the poor, no time for the people that you should be showing Christ to. And so in his book, she gets pulled up, and I'm pretty sure that she's pulled up by his wife. And so his wife says this, talking about liberals and being liberal and all the rest of it. So I'll read this to you because it's lovely. It says, there is nothing liberal about coming down the road that another human being is travelling to meet them and bring them to safety. If that is liberal, then God is illiberal. There is nothing liberal about helping people to smash the false gods and images of religion or worldliness that have let them down and given them nothing over the years. If doing that is liberal, then God is illiberal. There is nothing liberal about using divine gifts of creativity and flexibility and ingenuity to open doors of understanding and delight in those who desperately need to know that compassion and care really are waiting for them in the arms of the Father. If that is liberal, then the God who created this world is a liberal. There is nothing liberal about treading the narrowest path imaginable yourself, but throwing your arms as wide as they'll go to greet and enfold as many others as possible. If that is liberal, then all the most godly men and women I've ever known are liberal. There is nothing liberal, Doreen, about staying at the back of the expedition to tie shoelaces and to encourage the fat ones and the slow ones and the ones whose feet hurt, rather than pushing triumphantly to the front of the line so that you can be first to the ultimate destination. If doing that is liberal, then Jesus was the greatest liberal of them all. And I think that what we have is we have many churches who have almost like pop star, media star, superstar people under the spotlight. And actually, they should be transparent. You should see through them and you should see Christ. And they're not important. What's important is how you live for Christ. And I don't think the church, and I've touched on this on my last message that I spoke on the Laodicean church only yesterday. The church, i.e. the body of Christ, the church across every single continent on the planet Earth, needs to bring Christ back into the centre of his church, not leave him stood outside banging on the door to come in. And I think we live in the age where Christ has been removed and other things have been put in place, whether it's building projects, whether it's ministry outreaches, whether it's evangelical crusades, whether it's healing ministries, whether it's spiritual gifts. All of those things have usurped Jesus as the head of the church. And when we bring him back, we'll start to see the church actually doing what it should be doing.
You raise a question about Jesus is almost absent, so what's taking its place? I would argue, through my own experience, and admittedly this is not all Christian churches, not all Christians, but the ones I've come across over, say, the last 20, 25 years and going to university, fear. It's a fear-based attitude. And in fact, I sent you a video that was James Baldwin, an American black playwright who wanted to become a priest. He was born in Harlem and he did a lot of writings. He didn't join because he was gay, but he did a very famous play, Come Say It to the Mountain, which many years later had a revival in London theatres. And he was interviewed, I can't remember her name, but I can remember her voice and her look. I sent it to you, perhaps you'll remember who she was, a Welsh lady. At that time, it was Born Again Christians. And he, of course, has got very strong opinions, or had very strong opinions on religion. And he said religion, for a lot of people who go to church now, is a hiding place because they're panic-stricken. They don't know what to make of this century. It was the 20th century then. He said it's been created and they don't know what to make of it. And therefore they seek to be told that they're correct, they're saved if you come to this church. Other things I've seen written similar to him gives me the impression that that could be true for many. I'm not saying it's for everyone, but far too many to be comfortable with. They've gone for the wrong reasons, but they don't necessarily know really why they're there, and they're not Christ-focused. And on the Bulwark podcast that I sent you, I was very taken. In fact, I found this quite pleasing to myself. It was brought up about, and you say that when you see a Christian, you shouldn't see the person, you should see Christ shining through. That kind of thing came up, and they admitted that, or somebody had written, that if you want to see Christ-like people, don't go to a church. Certainly in America. It's terrible, isn't it? In fact, it's similar to what Gandhi said, isn't it?
It's very similar. You know, I like your Christ. It's your Christians I don't like. They are so unlike your Christ. You know what a tree is by the fruit it produces, right? And people can talk about being an oak tree, but if they don't produce acorns, they're not an oak tree. They're something else. And you can say that you're a Christian, but if you don't produce the fruits of Christ, i.e. the fruits of the Spirit, and demonstrate those, you've got to wonder. It's not for me to judge what the position of somebody's soul is with God or his spirit is with God. But you can, you know, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. We need to understand that, because Christianity is so steeped in the Western culture as well, particularly the Western culture. And let's face it, the United States of America, irrespective of the American Indians that were there beforehand, but the nation of the United States of America, or the many Confederate groups that make up that nation, are pretty much founded on the Puritan Pilgrim Fathers and a certain breed of religious belief, which is really entrenched. And that is a very high regard for the Scripture, a very high regard for the Bible, very high regard for God, and a very profound recognition that God is central to a lot of things. So there's some positive things in America, that God is God, and that many Americans would say that they are Christian because they believe in God. I would argue, well, that doesn't make you Christian. That just makes you a deist or a theist. Muslims believe in God, but they're certainly not Christians. Jews believe in God, but they're not Christians. Hindus believe in many gods, but they're not Christian. The distinction in Christianity is that you believe God became man and walked this earth. And in the relationship that you find with that man, you move into Christianity. Huge distinction. And your life needs to reflect him. That makes him the most important thing. And so I always try and describe him as the hub of the wheel. He is the hub. If you don't have him as the hub, your wheel will be wonky. If you try and make the centre of the wheel at the end of one of the spokes, or on one of the spokes, or anywhere on one of the spokes, on any part of the wheel will not turn properly. It will always be out of kilter. So you have to understand who he is. And bear in mind, I speak week after week to Christians. I don't tend to, I engage with people in the course of the week who have no belief, some belief, lots of belief in lots of things. When I speak to Christians who are long-standing men and women who have professed that they are Christian. And I am staggered sometimes that when I sort of drill down into what makes them Christian, it's a belief in God. And I have to unpack that with them and say, no, that doesn't make you Christian. A belief in God does not make you Christian. A belief in God makes you a theist or a deist. So which of the two are you? And then we can drill that down further. And then you drill it down further. And the lack of illumination, I think it's got to be illumination as to who Jesus is. It staggers me. It only staggers me because these are people who have professed Christianity for such a long time. I never understood who Jesus was, but I always believed in God. I've always believed in a God. I never really understand who Jesus was. He's the Son of God. Yeah, big deal. Whoop, whoop. But then when I had my illumination as to who he is, that makes things so different. And then everything else just falls away. Because the things that I thought were really important, the things that I would have gone to battle on and died on the battlefield over, about this thing and that thing and the other thing, because they follow a certain theological train of thought that I would agree with because I was right and everybody that didn't think that was wrong, slowly began to unravel. Because when he is the centre, he's the only thing that's important. I think it's Augustine who's attributed as saying, in the essentials unity, in the non-essentials liberty, in all things love, or charity, as he put it. So first of all, we need to agree what the essentials are, and I think Orthodox Christianity teaches what the essentials are quite well. Most good churches will have a very clear statement of faith as to what they believe. Most of it's not that difficult to get your head around. It comes from the Apostles' Creed and that sort of thing. It's very simple. That's what you need to believe. So the essentials unity. In the non-essentials, so anything that isn't that, have some liberty. Have a little bit of a slack on it. Don't go into bat for it all. But in all of it, the whole lot, remember that you're in fellowship with people and that what you should be looking to do is find common ground. Always look for the common ground. And I think what disappoints me when I see men and women playing the Christian card, and I was going to say the Christian Trump card, but I didn't mean it in the terms of President Trump. I meant it in the card game, top trumps, the card game, laying down a trump card of Christianity, therefore my trump card of Christianity beats yours. I think to myself, that's really sad, because what we should be doing is looking for common ground where we can stand together and we can agree on common things which are of value to everybody, recognising that not everybody is going to accept these things, but that this is a great start point. And when you've got common ground with somebody, you can begin to build relationship and you can begin to dialogue. And you never know where that will go.
Well, it's like we're going to eventually, Steve. I mean, it's taken us quite a few months just to get into Mark 2.
Yes, it has taken a while.
When we get to Mark 12, we'll eventually come to, which potentially very easy to understand. It's the two great commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and all your strength. And then later, the second one, and your neighbour as yourself.
Love your neighbour as yourself, yeah.
But very rarely now do you see that fully in play, especially in certain places where it's become hijacked by politics. It seems to be, love your neighbour if it's of the same denomination, but don't love anybody else. And I find that quite bizarre.
Yeah, and it's troubling, Mark. And I would agree with you, it's totally bizarre, and it's completely unnecessary. I was at a home group meeting, and we have a meal beforehand, and I was sat next to somebody who was visiting and who was probably you'd describe him as an older, typical evangelical Pentecostally type of Christian who's got a very fixed view of the world. And I was having some conversations with him, and I got the impression very quickly that he was probably less than impressed with the little fellowship that I look after. And he didn't know that I was the pastor of it. And then he started to talk about some other bits and pieces, and he said, well, who actually pastors this church? And so I sort of smiled at him and said, oh, that would be me. And he went, you? I went, yes, that would be me. He said, do you have any theological training? And I said, yeah, I do actually. Yeah, I do. I studied theology for 4 years at college. Oh, right. I said, see, the problem is, isn't it? People, they get a mindset. And I gave him an example. I said, so people will go to war on things like, is there a rapture? Is there not a rapture? Do you get baptized? Do you not get baptized? Are spiritual gifts for today? Are they not for today? Is it premillennial, postmillennial, panmillennial? Pan out all right in the end? Millennial? Who knows? And they're all of these things which Christian denominations can get a worldview on and get entrenched in. And if you're not in that camp, then you're wrong. And I was trying to sort of get him to open up about this. I said, let me give you an example. I said, baptism. He said, yes. I said, so how should we baptize? He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, do we dunk them under the water once? Or do we do it 3 times? In the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, in the name of the Spirit? Or do we just pour water over their head? Or do we sprinkle them with water? Or do we actually baptise them when they're babies, like some churches do? I said, so all of the churches, lots of churches I can think of will do things differently, and they all think they're doing it right. But they're all doing it differently, so none of them are doing it right. They're all doing their own thing. So how should we do it? And are you telling me that those that don't do it in the way that you do it are wrong? And we won't even go into the Jewishness of it as to where baptism comes from and what it actually means, but just from a Christian tradition. So you've got to be very careful about how you judge people. Yeah, and Jesus said, do not judge, therefore, so that you will not be judged, because by the standard that you judge, you're going to be judged. And the measure that you use is going to be the measure that you receive. Don't look at that speck in your brother's eye, but actually fail to remove that dirty great big plank of wood that's in your own eye.
Yeah, molten logs.
Yeah, it's just nonsense. And I just think that we need to be really careful about how we generate what is actually our prejudices, our personal preferences, our worldview, our societal mouldings, our political leanings, and to make them godly, we stick a Christ tag on it. And I'm not sure that Christ tag is appropriate for a lot of this stuff.
But I also think that they're very quick to judge.
Yeah, they are.
Now we don't agree on everything, but if we were to hear either you saying something or I say something and it's not quite what we believe in, we wouldn't instantly say, no, we'd think about it, we'd give perhaps a counter view and then see what we agree on. But too often I have come across modern iterations of Christ, and I say modern because I've got this memory when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, this wasn't a thing. It's happened in the last 30, 40 years at least, although we know that Churchianity goes back much longer. I'm going to show you something here now that I found by chance in a little free library. And it's today's best non-fiction. It's Reader's Digest. This is about 25 years old. And the reason I got it is for our other channel, Steve. It's talking about the year 1000.
All right.
In England. And it's wonderful. It goes through the whole year, month by month, and it shows you what life was like. And of course, it was very Christian. And it's talking about one of the pieces we've had, and this is again in England, the Julius work calendar, beautiful piece of work. And it was instructional manual for young monks. It was 12 months on 12 pages, beautifully illustrated, headed with the name of the month and its sign of the zodiac. Right. You mention zodiac to a lot of evangelicals now, and they'll push you out of the house saying that's demon talk. When did that happen? But just let me give you one more. It's the same thing about life in those ages. England itself was a network of magical sites. The altar of every church contained the physical relics of at least one saint, and it was thought a saint was intimately present wherever his or her relics might rest. It was seen as a disembodied spirit that could talk. Now, that's no longer the case. And you could say a lot of stuff from the past is no longer the case. We don't necessarily want to keep some things that the early Christians believed in, which was not scriptural. It was bound on because of the time and place. Yeah, we get that. But where's this sudden fear of, and we talked about this before, books to do with magic, the Harry Potter question, when you only have to read Genesis and find out there's more fantastical elements in that than in any modern fantasy book? Why has this suddenly become something you can't talk about with some people when it's not even scriptural?
I think that there are some people who see the devil in everything. There are some people who see the devil in nothing. And I don't think either extreme's helpful or healthy. And I think it is an absolute failure to understand what our belief is all about. And it is a buying into a societal worldview, which is fearful, which is, as you would say quite often, deficit theorizing.
Great phrase, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great phrase. And what it does is it fails to actually recognise our place in this story. I think that we have got our place in the story of the world totally out of shape. You see, there are some Christians who struggle with the spiritual world because it's spiritual, and it's almost like that you die and go to heaven. And again, this is a whole different subject, but the whole concept of heaven is, I believe, incredibly misunderstood. We're talking about dimensions outside of our dimensions. I sit here in my study here. I can see less than 3% of what's going on around me.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yep, less than 3%. So there's over 97% of stuff happening all around me in dimensions that I cannot see, touch, taste, feel, move into, move through, and all the rest of it. And yet we worship a God who infuses all of that and who can move in and out of that at whim and at will. And I think that that is what the spiritual world is. It's a dimensionality. And so that means that the natural world in which we live is nothing more than a very small part of the whole which is going on around us. And when we begin to realise that, we can lighten up about so many other things. And we can also stop being afraid about so many other things. Light casts out darkness. Darkness doesn't cast out light. So if you are in a pitch black room and you strike a match, what happens? The darkness dispels. The darkness becomes light all around wherever that light is. And if as a Christian you are somebody who says, I am filled and I live with the Spirit of Christ, then you are filled with light. And where you go, you take the light with you. And so if you go into a place that is dark spiritually, you take the presence of Christ with you into that darkness. And light casts out darkness. So you don't have to fear all of this stuff. And you certainly don't have to get excitable about these things. Now, I have a very particular view that where good overcomes evil, that's a good story. Where good triumphs, that's a good story. And anything that is good comes from God. And so if you're writing fiction where you have got fantastic worlds and incredible characters and evil, wicked beasts, and good overcomes the evil, then that's a good story. And that's a good moral. And that's a good principle, and it shows you something of God. Yep. My very good friend Dave Gemmell, who, very well-known British author of heroic fantasy, he would write stories where evil was overcome, where there would be werebeasts, where there would be magicians and sorcerers and all sorts of things like that. And there would be magic and there would be demons, and evil would be beaten. Because evil would be overcome, because light casts out darkness. But to forge the story, you have to engage those characters. And to read those characters, I don't think, this is my view, others will hold a different view, I don't think is something that you should be fearful of.
No. I think personally, and this is an extreme view, and I know you may disagree with this one, and I'm going to defend Christians of old. It used to be that if you had a community, until quite modern times, the cleverest people were in the abbeys. They could read. They often went to universities. The mortarboard is because of the clothes they wore. They did years of study. They knew stuff, and therefore they had curiosity, and they were open to different ideas. So one of the reasons why Istra, which was the old pagan goddess of Easter, is called Easter. The church didn't abandon it. They gladly took it on because they used it as part of the main festivals of the church year in English. They could very easily have abandoned it, but they didn't. They weren't scared of it. And when I grew up, I remember having wonderful conversations with people that are still there. In fact, and I mentioned him before, Michael Geet, who is an English pastor, is well known for his pipe, and he loves Lord of the Rings. He has no problem. There's a Belgian English-speaking priest who was a writer, and he became famous for loving Star Wars. But for some reason, the modern iterations of churches seem to shut away, and I've got a reason, I think, I'm not saying it's fully this, but I think it's epistemic vice. It's what we talked about. What has happened is episteme, and apologies for having to say this again to you, Steve, you know this, the way in which we learn, the virtues are to be open and engaged in dialogues, and not to necessarily accept, but to at least listen and get involved with narratives that are not your own. You don't see that in a lot of modern churches now. It's almost as though they've got a group of, I wouldn't say captive people, but people that are drawn to it because they don't engage in counter narratives. I wonder, from the very get-go, why we probably turned a lot of people off. It's because we accept that Jesus was a Jew.
Yeah, on that last point, you may absolutely be right. What I would say is the church is drawn from society.
Yes,
and society is closed down, and society is blinkered. You cannot hold different views these days without being pilloried for the views that you hold. Everyone must fall in step and follow the same narrative. So if that is happening in the secular world, that will be reflected in the church, i.e., whatever church denomination you slot into, in the same way as whatever political party you slot into. Labour do not speak to National. National do not speak to Liberals. Liberals do not speak to Padamari. Whatever it might be, we have lost the ability to actively engage with people in respectful, grown-up dialogue in society, and it is replicated within the body of the church. And it shouldn't be.
But no, it shouldn't be, because I was going to say, surely that should be the one place that doesn't fall foul of that, and won't, if they have people like you saying up front, this is how we should engage with others.
The church will do what the church is meant to do when it has Christ as the centre, because when he is the centre, it strips away all of this other stuff that you get hot under the collar about. You don't have to worry about whether you are left, right, pink, green, yellow, black, white, whatever you are, because your focus is on Christ. And if you look at Christ, you look at everything that he did, you look at his teachings, you look at the people that he engaged with. He engaged with the lepers, the sinners, the tax collectors, the prostitutes. He also engaged with the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, the Romans, Pilate,
Samaritans.
the priests, the Samaritans. So he engaged across the whole spectrum of his society, and he did so on a very central level. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love your neighbour as yourself, i.e., love your neighbour who is like you, i.e., a human being, and a human being is made in the imago Dei, the image of God. And so when you start to do that, and when you start to view everybody and every interaction as a God interaction with somebody who is made in the image of the God that you worship, you can look at somebody and go, somewhere in you is a speck of the God that I worship, because you are, in some way, shape and form, somewhere in you, there is something of the touch of God in your life. Now, I'm struggling to see it, but I'm going to continue to engage with you because I believe that you're special. I believe that you're unique. And I believe that somewhere you've got something to offer. And so let's see where we can tease that out, where we can find our common ground, and where we can start to build our relationship. But we don't do that in society. Church just reflects the society that it's part of, and it shouldn't. You know, I have that breakdown of what the kingdom of God is, and I've broken that down from my sort of studies of the Jewish texts. The kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven, Malkat Shamayim, Malkat Shaddai, the rule, the reign, the sovereignty of God, here on earth, in contrast to the worldly powers, in order to present an alternative social reality. And that is what a Christ follower should be doing. They should be bringing the rule, the reign, the sovereignty of God here to earth, in contrast to what's going on in the political world, in contrast to what's going on in our society, in order to present an alternative social reality. And that alternative social reality will point back to the God that sends it down.
I personally believe it will change. And I think we're seeing change and perhaps the early seeds of such. You only have to follow the news and see how people are now, not so much politically, but societally standing up for certain rights and wanting certain things to be as they've always been for the benefit of others. They don't want things taken away from them. So perhaps that's a good sign. Perhaps people are waking up. But what happens if it doesn't? What's going to happen to the church if it maintains its predominant current trajectory and it only requires a small portion, really? The apple rots from the inside. What eventually is going to happen is either going to break away, fragment, or something's going to happen, or I personally think it's going to be better, because you said before, you squeeze the fruit, the juices, the fragrance is going to come out, although that's more like a lemon and a lime.
Well, it's like
an apple.
It's like myrrh. You crush myrrh and it releases its fragrance.
Do you think things will improve?
I think that, and I've said this for some time, I think that we will see a divergence. So you have people who claim to be followers of Christ, and so they're all walking on the same track. But then you'll have what I call the institutional church, and the institutional church is a church that is not aligned to Christ. And then you'll have the relational church, and the relational church is the church which is aligned to Christ. So you'll have these almost like two streams of Christianity, and they'll diverge. And you will end up with the people who are Christ's will ultimately be persecuted. Because there is one thing that the world, and I use that term in inverted commas, the world cannot stand. It's Christ. People won't persecute you for believing in God. They will persecute you for believing that Jesus is God, for your belief that Jesus is God. And I think that what we will see, as we have seen in the Chinese church, the more the church is persecuted for believing who Jesus is, the more it is crushed, the more it releases its fragrance, and the more people are attracted to it. And I suspect that one day there will come a time of persecution for people who are followers of Christ, not for people who follow an institutional Christian path where they can turn up on a Sunday and sing some hymns and say some prayers to God and have something read from the Bible which is totally inoffensive.
I've said this before as well. I always look at the imagery of a choir, in which over time the choir's gone quiet and we've got two soloists at the extreme ends warbling away and getting everyone's attention. Slowly the choir's humming now and it's starting to pick up voice, and it will drown out the obnoxious extreme ends. And those obnoxious extreme ends is Christian nationalism one side and hard-faced atheists on the other. This sense that they want to create a binary opposed against each other is, forgive the Anglo-Saxon word, but I think it's appropriate here. It's just bollocks. And it's about time we did away with it. And I can say that there are many thousands of people who do not associate themselves with Christianity but want the Jesus of the Bible to become more pronounced, because it's created the modern world of morals and ethics, along with others. But it's predominantly in the West, the bedrock, the foundation stone. And we only have to look at the teachings of Christ to know that you cannot build a house without a good foundation. The foundation is there, just the house is gone. I'll have to get rid of that one. It's gone. It's starting to crumble to one side because of, I don't know, whether it's age, tiredness, or people who just took their eyes off the maintenance of the place. I don't know.
I think the society has been sold a pup. Society has been told that God is dead, that there is no longer a need to believe in any of this, that we are now enlightened and that we now can have everything that we want, and that our material possessions will give us all the satisfaction that we need, and that pills will keep us alive and all the rest of it. And the reality is all of this has been found wanting, and there is a hunger and there is a thirst for spirituality. Yes. And unfortunately there are some people who think that Christianity is not spiritual. It's the most spiritual blooming religion on the planet. We worship a God who died and who rose from the dead and walked out of a tomb and then appeared through walls and then ascended and stepped into another realm. I think that's pretty funky. I don't think it gets much more funky than that. So, we have a very spiritual religion which will fill the well of people's needs if they actually understood what they were being taught or what was being offered to them. I just don't think that Christ is offered. I really don't. I think that what's offered is a whole series of platitudes. Come to church and you'll get this, and this, and you come to church and you find that you don't get that, and you don't get that, and this doesn't work out for you, and your world is still have been total basket case, and things are still going wrong for you, and you go, God hasn't made it work. And you go, well, God was never going to make it work. Who told you that? Well, the church said it would all be right, and the pastor said this, and if I do this, then this will happen. It didn't happen, therefore God's let me down. You go, no, God hasn't let you down, mate. That muppet who told you that has let you down. Because that's not the way it works.
And the strange thing is, and we talked about this before we came on air, how shallow is all this?
It is, mate. It really is.
It's just peddling in shallowness all the time. You go onto the YouTube, you type in Bible, and you'll get some really good stuff, including ourselves. But wow, there's a lot of shallowness there that looks fantastic, but no content whatsoever.
Image over substance, mate. All image over substance. We live in a culture of veneers. We live in a movie star culture, and probably from the 1940s and the silver screen becoming big. So for the last 80 odd years, we have been completely bedazzled by the Hollywood jet-setting lifestyle, the glitz, the glamour, and all the rest of it. And what happens is the church has replicated it, so that what you turn and see on your television, you also get when you walk into the church. I had people turn up at the church this weekend who haven't been before, and I'm always a little bit mindful when people come in, because I've been teaching through a series, so they're coming into something that they have got no background in with what I've been teaching for 19 months, and so I always sort of try and catch them and say, hey, just let you know, there's obviously a structure to the way that we operate here. We'll sing a number of songs, we'll take communion, we'll do this sort of thing. I said, but then I'll open the Bible and I'll actually teach you. I will teach from the scripture. And they went, oh, right, okay. I said, so when you come to this church, and if you come back to this church, you're going to get taught. And I'm not going to pull my punches. And I'm going to tell you it as it is. And I'm going to use language which conveys the grit that the Bible actually talks about. So if Paul says that it's skabala, it's skabala. And skabala is a Greek word for fecal matter. We have a four-lettered word beginning with S that describes it quite nicely,
Yeah.
But you can imagine reading that out in the middle of a Greek audience, and Paul goes, I'm telling you this, compared to all of that, this is all skabala. They'd have gone, what? What did he say? So I think we need to just make it all real, and we need to make sure that people understand what it is that we're following and how we follow him, and make it relevant. Bring the Bible to life, man. I think if we actually brought the Bible to life, it's not just black and white, it's riddled with colour, and we just need to bring it up.
But yes, and I agree, but not just the imagery, it's the depth.
Yeah.
It's what underpins it.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, where we fall foul with the modern algorithm. It's too deep for some people.
It's a shame, isn't it? It's a shame.
Not really. It's a shame for people who ignore it. But then again, most people, once they've left school, think they don't want to be taught anymore.
Yeah, some people think that they've got nothing else to learn. That's what's quite scary. I said on Sunday, if you think that you're going to come into a church week after week, if you think that you've got nothing to learn from the men and women who stand up at the front having wrestled with the scriptures to bring you a message, if you think that you've got nothing to learn, mate, you've got a lot to learn. Because there is stuff. You have to be open, and you have to be teachable, and you have to be willing to learn, and you have to want to learn.
But that's epistemic virtue. Unfortunately, we don't see it in far too many places. And it's not just churches. In fact, the way I see it, can you imagine somebody going to a football stadium every game, sitting there, but have no interest in the rules, who's playing, and the history of it? And they hate everybody other's team and sport. You'd think, then why are you here?
Why are you here? Yeah, don't bother. Stay at home.
And that's the church.
It unfortunately is in some cases, yeah. It really is.
But not yours, Steve.
Well, I'm sure that there have been people that have come into our fellowship and gone, this is not for me, I don't like it. It's not happy clappy enough, it's too... I've been told that it's too much Bible in it. And you go, it's a church? Where do you expect there to be? Karaoke? No, go down to the pub.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I showed you a video where it was in Cincinnati, and they kicked the Bible like a football into the crowd. What does that say?
Sadly, like I say, mate, the church is made up of society, and the church replicates what society does, sadly. And that's not the way it should be. The church should influence society, not the other way around.
Well, hope springs eternal.
Always,
and
mate. You've got to keep hopeful.
Small pebbles
Yep.
in a large pond. Well, thanks for that.
That's good chat. You take care.
Ta-ta for now.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.